Welcome to the Daily Dawg podcast for Friday, September 5th. We are in Game Week 2, and we are just one day away from Georgia taking the field again in Sanford Stadium this week against the Governors of Austin Peay, a small public school from Tennessee. We talked a little bit about Austin Peay yesterday and went over who they are and a little bit about their history. The honest truth is we don't know a ton about the team. We referenced the fact that they played last week and they beat Middle Tennessee State, which is a FBS team, and they were able to pull off that win on the road, and it was their first win against an FBS team since 1987. So congrats to them. I don't know if that means they're even as good a team as Marshall, despite the fact that Marshall was a team of people that all just met each other basically walking onto the field. Transfers as their head coach from the previous year that took them to the Sun Belt title had moved on to Southern Miss, and now they had new coach, new players, lots of additions from the portal, lots of people leaving from the portal, meant for a little bit of a chaotic situation as Marshall took the field. We didn't really know who they were, but they were an FBS team, and Marshall's been historically a pretty good team that can give the big teams fits from time to time. Austin Peay, not so much. Austin Peay is an FCS team. And even within their own conference, they played for many years in the Ohio Valley Conference, and they've rarely been a significant threat in the Ohio Valley Conference. So we don't know a lot about them, but we talked about their history and about the school and learned a little about that so we can be knowledgeable fans as we at least know we're playing the Governors. They'll be wearing red and white, and they're from Tennessee. So what can we look at today? What's important going into tomorrow, into game day? We talked a little bit about perspective and comparing this Georgia team not just to Georgia teams of the past as we look at them and say, well, are they as dominant as the championship winning teams of 2021 and 2022? And we've referenced the fact that we're not really sure we will ever see teams that dominant again with the way football has changed with the portal, NIL, and other considerations. So we know and have laid out this idea that what we really need to look at is the other championship contenders, the other teams that are out there, and how do we stack up against them? Could we play with them? Could we win a game against them? Do we have the tools necessary? And how do we develop throughout the season with the tools we have to give us a fighting chance in those teams, in those games? And that's looking ahead to the playoff. That's skipping right over the SEC championship, which, of course, in that case, we're just looking strictly at the other teams in the SEC. First and foremost, we have to play our schedule, have one of the two best records in the SEC, win the various tiebreakers, and if we're one of those teams, then we'd get into the SEC championship game. Then once we're in the SEC championship game, we'd have a chance to win the SEC championship. One might argue whether or not that's best from a football point of view. Historically, everybody can appreciate championship, and I think as we look back at last year, where we've gotten so focused after back-to-back national championships and 29 game winning streak and undefeated regular season following up the in the 2023 season following 2021 and 2022, then falling short in the SEC championship game. I think we all enjoyed watching the beatdown of Florida State, listening to them whine and complain and seeing our team just go out and kick butt and perform. But in the end, there was a lot of empty calories there. We had a 12-0 season. We didn't win the SEC championship. We didn't get into the 4-team playoff that year, the last year of the 4-team playoff. We didn't win a national championship. And I don't ever want to subscribe to the idea that a Georgia team is only valuable and fun and enjoyable in a good season if they win a national championship or even just an SEC championship. One of the great things about being a Georgia fan, having so many rivals, is you can look back over the year and say, look, we had a great record. We were ranked this, that, or the other, and this is what we did against our rivals. And lately, that's been a lot of fun. And we're going to take a look at that soon. How have we done against our rivals, and how has that changed over the last 5, 10, 15, and 20 years? But that'll be a separate show upcoming one day. But for now, what we're trying to do is take a look at the perspective on this season, going a little deeper beyond just the game and what we see on the field and saying, well, what are we looking about? What are we looking at, and what are we thinking about, and how do we compare to those other teams out there? So I do think, and just wanted to share the perspective, that looking back at last season, I think it's meaningful that we are the defending SEC champions. And I think even the media, both in the SEC and the national media, seem to be forgetting that. Obviously, there was a lot of hype coming into the season about Texas, and they just kind of got anointed to number one. And I think that's interesting given the fact that the media took for a long time, even within the SEC, kind of took a prove it approach to Georgia. We had climbed up to a high or elite status with our recruiting and some of our play on the field, but often came up short in the game that was necessary to win the SEC championship uh, or to get into that national title conversation. And so the media kind of just was like, well, let's wait and see. And then you look at Texas, and I think I highlighted earlier this week in a show, in their last, including now the game against Ohio State to start the season last week, in their most recent three seasons and the one game this season, they are a combined 7-8 in games against the top 25, which, I think it's kind of funny that they managed to get all this preseason hype, picked to be the SEC champion. And I guess what I'm thinking back is you look back a couple of years ago and even a couple of the 21 and 22 seasons, I think there was a lot of people, maybe they picked Georgia or there was still a lot of love for Alabama, even if Georgia was thought to be slightly better or the team that had the edge. But the idea there was, and look, I guess we can always say when you got Nick Saban on the sideline, maybe you never bet against Nick Saban. But I think the sense of the media was, yeah, Georgia's loaded. Georgia could be the team. But until they get there and are the team, I'm going to look at Alabama. And Georgia has been the team, okay, for 2021, 2022, 2023. Yeah, we fell short in the championship game, again against Alabama. But Texas wasn't the team that was there. Of course, they weren't in the SEC championship yet. So that maybe isn't a fair comparison. But the point being that Alabama was there. They won it, went on, and got to get into the playoff. But we had an undefeated season that year. We came back last year. We played Texas in the regular season, then got them again in the SEC championship game, won both times. And like we've highlighted, both teams are losing a lot of people and then bringing back new people. Both teams have been at the elite level recruiting lately. Both teams are coming into the season with a lot of question marks, a lot of pieces to replace, a lot of people to grow into new positions, but overall immensely talented. So why is it Texas is basically a 2-1 favorite when you look at the SEC media from media days to win the SEC championship when they haven't proven it? And you look at their record in big games, still haven't proven it. So there's automatically this sense that, it's been the joke obviously around college football for a long time. Texas is back. How many times have we heard that? But there's a sense right now that people are accepting the idea that Texas is back. Maybe not as a national champion or a conference champion, but they're back at the top of football. They're an elite team that has to be taken seriously. And I think a lot of people skipped right over that prove it stage. And at the moment, I don't think they've really proved it. So why am I bringing this up, or what's the perspective here? The idea is I'm saying, look, we are the defending SEC champion, and we're the team that's been running the conference essentially for the last 3 or 4 years. Everything comes through us. So I think that's something we can really hang our head on and look back to last season and say, hey, we're the SEC champions. So yeah, we didn't win the national championship. We got into the playoff, but it can't be national championship or bust. You have to appreciate an SEC championship. You have to appreciate a great season where you finish in the top 10, you beat some of your rivals. And we did that. We beat our rivals last year, won an SEC championship, went to the playoff, didn't have quite the strength in the team and the injuries and different things that just hampered us. And we just weren't the team, unfortunately, by the time we got to the playoff. And it's disappointing to have seen that. But now we're looking to see what this team can do. And what this team can do, I guess the point I keep trying to make, is going to depend a lot on what the other teams are doing out there, not just comparing ourselves to our former selves. So we talked about some of those contenders, and we're going to dig a little deeper right now into who they are. And so for the moment, I'm still looking at the national picture. I'm kind of skipping over the SEC. Things have changed already after week one. Texas was considered the favorite, maybe Georgia second, and then a group that included LSU, Alabama, and maybe a couple others were the next group down. Well, Alabama suddenly looks like they would be lucky to have a winning record in the SEC, depending on who you talk to. LSU went on the road and beat Clemson and has leaped us, in many people's mind, to be the favorite for the SEC. And Texas fell flat on their face against Ohio State and just didn't look good overall. Now, people haven't written them off yet, but now you're kind of looking at people thinking, okay, LSU's the favorite, Texas, Georgia, then who knows? So, but that's in the SEC. There's a lot to say there, or a lot to keep an eye on. And the good news with that is that'll play itself out. For the most part, the teams are going to play each other. Everybody will have a fair shot at the conference record, and then the two top teams will make it to the SEC championship. The national championship, a little bit of a different story. First and foremost, you got to qualify to get into this 12-team tournament. So there'll be 12 teams that make it, but at the moment, what I'm kind of looking at is taking a look and saying, let's talk about how we stack up, or what games are going to shape the season. What are we going to be watching as Georgia fans? We're watching those other teams. We're keeping an eye on them, and we're comparing our team to their team. So part of that, again, is we have the time, we have the mental space, because we're not all invested like this was Florida week, or so we're not invested in hate Florida at the moment, or we're not invested in, okay, Alabama's coming to town, and no matter how they're playing, we owe Alabama and we need to get past this game. These are the kind of things that are going to dominate our thoughts when we get to the weeks of those games. But right now we got a little time to reflect. So what I'm kind of looking at this week is I made my list and I said, who do I think among the top 25 teams out there would I say are legitimate national championship contenders? Who are we comparing ourselves against as we watch the team play in the early season and try to think, do we have what it takes to seriously to set our expectations and say, are we seriously a contender or not? Now, maybe we could dig deeper in this, but for now, let me just share the list. I think it's a fairly self-explanatory list. Right now, I see Penn State, Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, Clemson, Miami, Oregon, Notre Dame, and LSU as national championship contenders. Now, that's only 9 teams, so there'll be 12 teams in the playoff. That's why I was starting a segment ago. But as we saw last year, some of the teams that make the playoff, and this is probably one of my bigger criticisms of a 12-team playoff, some of the teams that make the playoff are not legitimate title contenders. I mean, we're not really taking them seriously or thinking they're title contenders, and they didn't advance. You saw that last year. Arizona State got to that second round game with Texas, and they played them tough. And frankly, maybe they should have won. I mean, Texas had to execute a 4th down, and Texas was probably lucky to get out of that game. I don't think that means Arizona State was likely to take down Ohio State, or maybe even Penn State or Notre Dame if they had advanced and found those as their, maybe Notre Dame, because Notre Dame, again, was mostly about defense and just adequate offense. And Arizona State had a pretty sharp offense. So if they could have played enough defense, then maybe they could have pulled it out. But I think that, Arizona State was likely not going to advance multiple rounds and win a championship out of that. So sorry, Arizona State. Maybe you feel like I'm dismissing you a little bit, but Boise State, SMU, Indiana, these other teams that made the playoff, they didn't look like championship teams. They were there in the playoff. It was fun for everybody to talk about this new expanded opportunity for all these different teams, and good for them that they were really excited about their season and they had a reward for playing a great season. But I don't think most of us took them seriously as title contenders. They didn't look like title contenders on the field, and we were able to move on. So we're looking at the same thing now. We look ahead to this year's potential field. Like I said, I got 9 teams. I'm not saying all 9 of these teams are going to make it, but these are 9 teams that I think are legitimate national title contenders, and there's clearly going to be 12 teams in the field. So there's going to be, but for now, I'm not worried about trying to figure out who the field is. That involves looking at everybody's conferences and the other different, again, the smaller teams like the Boise States, and trying to pick among those teams. Okay, which team is it? Boise State again this year? Is it going to be somebody else? That's who will, as we go down the season, I guess we'll get closer to looking at, okay, who's going to be in the playoff, but who do we think could win it? So I think these 9 teams all have a legitimate chance. They all have some of the pieces necessary. And I think part of the reason they have a legitimate chance is what we've already talked about, that there's no one dominant team or 2 or 3 dominant teams. You still have teams like Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, even Alabama, which I haven't listed in here, but Alabama, despite the way they played on the field to start the season, they still have probably one of the 5 most talented rosters in football. So it's too early to say they're going to make a comeback and get back into the discussion. We're going to leave them on the sideline for the moment, but when we're talking about raw talent, that's, they have that. But raw talent's not the only thing it takes to get in there. So when we talk about the tools, raw talent is one of the tools. Coaching, play, effort, those are all other things that are part of the equation too. And thus far, in one game in, Alabama looks very troubling in that regard. Even though Texas lost, they still have the tools. They still have shown, yes, maybe their record, as I pointed out, in top 25 games hasn't been awesome. But by the way, it wasn't 2 in the 7 and 8. So that's 15 games. It's not like they were 2 and 13 in those games. They're 7 and 8. So they're winning some of them, enough of them to be a threat. Clemson, same thing. Clemson, certainly has the talent. They certainly have the experience. They have a coach who's been there before. They don't look like the Clemson teams that won the national championship before, but again, Ohio State doesn't look like the team that won it last year. Georgia doesn't look like the team that won it in 21 and 22. There just aren't going to be those teams unless you get one of those veteran teams that's kind of got all those pieces coming back. And I think one of the teams maybe we overlooked in that discussion, to be honest, is LSU. Yes, they were listed among the contenders from the get-go, but now that we look a little closer, Clemson, with the veteran leadership, maybe just actually is still a little deficient on the talent side. I mean, Dabo's taken a lot of criticism. He still recruits at a pretty high level, but his recruiting has not been elite the last several years. And there's been criticism of his recruiting style because he sort of has had this draconian idea that you're either all in on Clemson or we don't want you. So, when somebody commits to Clemson, they can't go visit any other schools. They can't keep looking. He's kind of tries to zero in on people who are only really looking at Clemson, and that is going to narrow your field a lot. And people have criticized that, and whether that's the reason his recruiting took a step back from being, in the top. And actually, to be honest, if we go back and look at those two title teams he had, neither of those teams were built on top 1, 2, 3 classes. They were still just top 10 classes, but they did each have one component, which was a super elite NFL quarterback. We can argue the merits of later years Deshaun Watson and or Lawrence, but for this moment in time, we'll go ahead and grant that those were NFL talents, for top level draft picks, and that catapulted otherwise a really good collection of players to an elite collection of players. And the other difference everybody sees right now is that so far Clemson hasn't been able to develop wide receivers or pass catchers that really are probably future NFL stars. And that may be what's letting them down, because they certainly have a capable quarterback. That, and they had a great running back last year, and they have historically, and on those championship teams they did. And right now, there's not an obvious home run threat or serious threat at running back. So maybe digging a little deeper into Clemson than I meant to, but the core idea there is, look, Clemson is a high-level team with good experience and enough talent to be a threat, even though they lost the opening game to LSU. LSU is probably better than we might have given them credit for when we look at how they really upped their budget. They pumped up to be like Ohio State a couple years. Last year was rumored to have spent $22-25 million to bring back enough people to compete, and then they did win the title with those people that came back, plus the other talent they had that emerged. This year we see Penn State doing that, and it was much discussed. Clemson was bringing back a lot of talent, but LSU brought back Garrett Nussmeier and other talented people, plus they did up their spending too. It's reported that they've spent about $18 million to keep this roster together. And if Clemson goes on to be a strong offensive team, then we will have noticed at that first game that LSU's revamped defense, with a lot of that money going to the defense and having some veteran guys there, is part of what made the difference. So I guess what I want to do is offer some perspective on the national championship. Sometimes we look at the top 25, we look at the field, we feel like it's all wide open. One of the things that this new playoff era with expanded playoff, portal, NIL, all those changes that we keep talking about over and over again, has created a little bit of a sense that maybe things are a little more wide open. And I think it's true to a certain level. Again, right now you don't have 1 or 2 or 3 teams that are able to just stockpile so much talent that they can basically just step onto the field and, edge everybody out on talent alone. And so But, the national championship in college football has always been a relatively elite affair. And I thought we'd take a moment to look at that a little bit because, again, what we're looking at is how do we, I just said, look, here's these teams that I think, and I'm not alone. I mean, a lot of people have looked at those teams, and said these are title contenders or legitimate threats to win the national championship. You can look at the betting odds on those teams, and those are all teams that are in that category as well. But what I think, um, what I guess I'm getting at is the national championship is usually going to come down to just a handful of teams. Just a handful of teams from a handful of conferences are usually what we're looking at. It's not completely wide open. So that lends a little more credibility, a little more perspective to how we get to those 9 teams. Those 9 teams I'm talking about, are representing the Big Ten, the SEC, and the ACC. Big 12's not even mentioned in there. Those are now what we have left of what used to be the power, a greater number of power conferences, but we're basically down to what we call Power Four. But in reality, I'm not really sure that we can look at the Big 12 right now as even a power team. I mean, yes, they've got teams in the top 25, but when you look at their best teams, Iowa State, Kansas State, teams like that, are we looking at teams that we think are legitimate title contenders? Do you really see those as teams that if they got into the if they get into the playoff, are they teams that are likely to make a run in the playoff and say, hey, look at these guys? I mean, I don't see that. I mean, it hasn't been true the last couple of years, and it doesn't feel like it's likely true. Let's just take a look. So the Big 12, in case you'd forgotten, is Iowa State, Kansas, Arizona, Arizona State, BYU, Houston, Oklahoma State, TCU, Texas Tech, UCF, Utah, West Virginia, Baylor, Cincinnati, Colorado, and Kansas State. So Arizona State made the playoff, and I already gave some thoughts on that. Iowa State has a really solid coach, and they have been a team that has been shown to be well coached and can make some noise in college football. TCU, as we well know, made the national championship game a couple years ago, but hardly looked like a team that, in their best version, was ready to ascend to the throne and win a national championship. And Texas Tech, they've put a lot of money into NIL here this year, and they're expecting good things. They're in the top. They're ranked 24th right now. So I don't know. Let's put a hold on them. But even again, if they have a great season and make it to the playoff, I'm not sure that I'm ready to say, yeah, I can see them making a run through the playoffs. Utah has built a lot of respect. Kyle Whittingham over the years has demonstrated he is a top-notch coach. He knows talent, and he gets the most out of his players. But even when they get into a conference championship, or when when they were playing in the Pac-12, even when they get into the playoff discussion, they're still usually overmatched on talent. Coaching and effort is almost always there, but talent really isn't there. So, so we have basically 3 conferences of the Power Four that we think teams can come from, and we really just have a couple schools from each of those. I mean, this year we're looking at Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon. So you got 3 teams out of the Big Ten. The ACC has Miami and Miami and Clemson. I'm sorry. I was pondering. Notre Dame used to plays their schedule out of the ACC, but they're not the ACC, and they had done that for quite some time. And Florida State obviously made some noise in the first week of the season, but again, we're not ready to throw them into that category yet. So we're going to leave them on the wait list. Keep looking at that. And then in the SEC, you've got Georgia and Texas and LSU are all pretty serious title contenders right now. And you could have a surprise team if a team made a run out of nowhere. South Carolina is in the top 10 right now. I mean, I don't think many of us who've watched Georgia football for a long time and are familiar with South Carolina could imagine them really making a run to a national championship, though they can be a tough team to play, and though they could finish a season in a top 10 ranking and have some really nice players. It's hard to imagine them having the depth to really make the run, but they're sitting there on the edge of it. And if they had a spectacular season and Lenora Sellers becomes a Heisman serious candidate or winner even, then yeah, I mean, they certainly have the schedule to do it if they make a run through their schedule. So I think that's, obviously a possibility. And like we said, Bama could get back in the equation. We don't know what we're going to get yet from Auburn and Florida and Ole Miss this year. Ole Miss was a legitimate threat last year, but they're having to restock, and they're not seen quite as much as a threat this year. And even when they were a threat last year, they fell short. But they were there. Had they won the game against Florida late season, they probably would have been in the playoff. They lost that game. That put them at 9-3 instead of 10-2, and took them out of the equation. So basically, we get back, sum up where we are. We got 9 teams that we think are legitimate contenders out of 3 conferences. And that stacks up historically. Taking a look back at the last 25 seasons of college football, there have been 26 teams, because you had a shared title in there. There have been 26 teams or 26 national champions listed in that time. You had a split champion in there. And there's actually just 13 teams that claimed those 26 titles in the last 25 seasons. And those are going to sound pretty familiar too. So let me read them out to you. That's Oklahoma, Miami, Ohio State, LSU, USC, Auburn, Texas, Florida, Alabama, Florida State, Clemson, UGA, woohoo, go Dogs, and Michigan. So, and multiple title winners in that include Clemson, Georgia, Alabama, obviously, had 5 in that time frame. Georgia and Clemson, 2. USC had 2. LSU had 2. And Ohio State has had 3 during that time frame. Boo. We have to acknowledge Ohio State's actually had more national championships in the last 25 years than us. But we've had more in the last 5 years. So, hey. Anyway, nonetheless, LSU had 3 in there. I mean, what a crazy team LSU is, right? LSU just either disappears or wins a title. So I don't know. We'll see what happens this year. So just 13 schools, and those are all very familiar schools. Those are all fairly elite schools. Some of them more elite historically than lately. Oklahoma, Miami, if you can call going back to the early 2000s historic. USC doesn't look like, we keep waiting to see if Lincoln Riley is going to make USC a contender again, but right now they seem pretty far from that. Auburn, Auburn is even more hard to peg than LSU, because any given season Auburn can rise up and win a national championship or go 6-7. So, and Florida State, got in there in the last 25 years with the 2014 title, and they often pop up in there and contend, but again, I don't think they're quite there yet. In this season, so we'll take a look and see what that is. But so last 25 years, you've had 26 teams split 25 titles, or 26 title winning teams in 25 seasons because of a split title in there where USC and LSU shared it in the early 2000s. And that's just 13 teams covering those 25 seasons. And all of those teams are teams that exist, again, in those power conferences, right? At least now. Now, there's been a lot of realignment during the time these teams have won these, but at this point, all of these teams come from those 3 conferences we just mentioned. The Big Ten, now, the way they've been realigned, the ACC and the SEC. So the Big Ten has 6 of those 26 titles, 3 by Ohio State, 1 by Michigan, 2 by USC, recent Big Ten addition. The ACC has 4, 2 by Clemson, 1 by Florida State, 1 by Miami, and the SEC had 16. So let's again, you can throw a little shade there on this whole Big Ten dominance. Looking over the last 25 years, you still had what are now SEC teams that had 16 titles. And by the way, the quote-unquote original, or teams that had been in the SEC those whole 25 years, had claimed 14 of those 16. So with expansion, we've retroactively claimed national titles from Oklahoma and Texas back in the early 2000 and 2005. But the rest of those titles, the other 14, came from UGA, Bama, LSU, Auburn, and Florida. Again, go Dogs. So those Power 3, the Power 4 conferences we see it now, but the Power 3 that we think are in contention this year, pretty much divvied up at the top of their conferences all of the national championships in the last 25 years. That's what we're getting at. We can narrow it down a little bit too and say, let's look at some more recent history, because again, we included obviously some teams that really haven't been at that mountaintop recently, with Oklahoma, USC, Miami, all in that list, even Auburn going all the way back to 2010. So Auburn's still in the last 15 years. So if you break it down to the last 15 years, and I chose 15, we've had 11 years now where we had the playoff. You had the 14 playoff for 10 seasons, and then we went to the 12-team playoff just this last year. So playoff seasons have been the last 11 seasons. And then if you just back it up a little bit from there, just include the last 15 seasons, these are the teams that have won championships in those 15 seasons. It's 8 teams. It's Auburn, Alabama, Florida State, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, LSU, Michigan. So again, you got 2 schools from the Big Ten claiming 3 championships, 2 schools from the ACC claiming 3 championships, and 4 schools from the SEC claiming 9 of these 15 championships. So my list with 9 teams in contention from the 3 Power 5 conferences, pretty historically consistent. So when we look out there at the big landscape, it's great to see a wide open field. It's great to see a top 25 or even a top 15, top 10. But in reality, our list of who's likely each season to win a national championship is pretty small. So what I got now is a little bit of a viewing guide as you head into the season. What are we looking at? If I'm accurate and these 9 teams are the teams to watch, then the games, what are their seasons like? Every game on their slate, I guess what I'm trying to say, is not a game that is going to matter. Just like this weekend, we're playing Austin Peay. Last week we played Marshall. These are not games that are moving the needle as far as the national championship goes for anybody. So, but there are games on our schedule that people are going to look at, and there are games that are probably going to be games that determine whether or not we make the playoff and determine whether or not we're legitimately a national title contender. I think the first of those starts next week with Tennessee, and then on the 27th of September with Alabama. Again, despite their trouble, they're immensely talented, and I would bet on them pulling their act together before I'll bet on them collapsing, but I'm going to say that collapsing is still an option. We'll talk about that more down the road. But Ole Miss, again, talented team, tough team to come into Sanford Stadium and beat us last year, so we owe them. But, that's going to be a tough out. You can't write that one off. Florida, again, not right now considered a title contender, but they're good enough to give us fits. And if they beat us, that's going to affect our ability to make the playoff and maybe how we feel about our ability to make it through the playoff. The game against Texas, November 15th, and I'm going to go ahead and throw Georgia Tech in there. I think that, they gave us everything we could handle last year, and they could have easily won that game. They are a good-looking team. I watched their game against Colorado to start the season, and I think that they played really well. They racked up over 300 yards rushing. Haynes King, as we saw last year, kept doing what he did in the game against us. He is a tough quarterback. He really won the game against Colorado running, but he can make passes, as he did against us when necessary, to get key first downs on third down. He can get you a touchdown either with his legs or throwing the ball. They've got some playmakers, and they are playing tough. They are playing really well for Brent Key. It looks like a team that is cohesive, and again, they're a collection probably mostly of 3-star talent, maybe a few 4 stars. And, so you're not going to look at them and say that they're going to go in and week out and beat teams of 4 and 5-star teams. And, but as we saw, they could give a lot of teams a run, and I think there's a good chance they get to 9 wins this year. Look, they could be 7-5, they could be 8-4, they could be 9-3. All are in play. Point being is they're a team because of where they are on our schedule, and the fact that they're going to, as close as they came to beating us last year, they're a team that can affect the outcome of who makes the playoff and who determines who's going to be playing for a national championship. So, we have all those games in our schedule. So I took a look at some of the rest of these teams that I've got on my list and see, well, what are games that I think are going to determine playoff worthiness or national championship worthiness or ability to get to it on these other team schedules. Clemson, taking a look at them, they've already played one of those games, as has LSU, both teams on this list. They've already played each other. Clemson also plays Georgia Tech. Clemson also has games against Florida State and South Carolina. And for the moment, I put SMU in there. SMU is ranked in the top 25. I saw them play in the playoff last year, and I was not impressed. Honestly, they look like a gift placement in the top 25 to me, but that's a different discussion. We'll get to that another time. Honestly, once you get past the top 10 or 15, I'm not sure if it makes much difference between who's 16 and 35 if you were laying out the rankings. So maybe SMU somewhere in that space in the 20s or 30s is a legit ranking. But nonetheless, they made the ACC championship last year, and they made the playoff, and they had something to say about it. So I'm not going to write them off yet, although I'm not convinced that they can win these games against the more talented and better teams. But we're going to go ahead like Georgia Tech and say, look, they're going to have an impact on it. They're on Clemson's schedule, and they're going to matter. Taking a look at Miami, Miami's already played Notre Dame. Notre Dame's already played Miami. They're both on the list. But Miami also has a game upcoming on September 20th against Florida. And that might be fun for Georgia fans to plan to watch since we have no game that week. So if you want something interesting to watch, you get to watch our hated rivals, the Gators, play Miami. You might not love Miami. I expressed some interest in seeing Carson Beck do well and watching him perform, and I was glad to see he did well. I've come to realize that a lot more Georgia fans are pretty down on Carson Beck, especially a lot of the students and a lot of the younger people. So I don't know how everybody out there in Dawg Nation feels about Carson Beck. My personal take is, look, he committed to the G. He was on the team for 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years. I'm not sure, right in that time frame. He played hard for our team for 2 years. He was a great player, and his leaving was not about him dumping us to go to Miami. He expected to go pro. Our coaches and coaches and staff expect him to go pro. That's what he said he was going to do. We had already allocated the money that had gone to him the previous year from, NIL money and stuff to other places. And then he realized it was going to be best for him, which I think was probably true, to try and improve his draft stock and come back and give it another try. Miami waived more money than we would have paid anyway, and he's a Florida native. He fits in well probably in Miami, and we honestly didn't have the money to pay him, from what I understand. Once he, changed his mind, we'd already moved on. So I don't begrudge Carson Beck going to Miami, and I hope he does well, and I hope he improves his draft stock and gets what he wants out of his career that he's put into effort to be a college football player and hopefully a pro player. So, but I know not all of you feel the same. Nonetheless, I think it'd be interesting with no Georgia game that week to watch the Miami-Florida game. So there's a little viewing guide. So Miami plays Notre Dame, Florida, Florida State, and SMU. So they're on the schedule again. Another contender, Oregon. Oregon just has 2 games on their whole schedule that I think are significant: Penn State and Washington. So moving on, Notre Dame. Also, I only see 2 games that are really significant. I mean, look, as a caveat, any team can lose to anybody any week, right? And then that's going to affect the playoff potential and national championship potential. Nobody saw Florida State even beating Alabama last weekend. Bama was almost a 2-touchdown favorite, much less than dominating. But that's what happened. So obviously any game on the schedule can affect playoff worthiness, national championship worthiness, and determine what's happening. That's one of the great things about college football. Every game matters. Less and less when we keep adding teams to the playoff, but still more than other sports, every game matters. So, but as far as teams that you actually think could win the game, could be a threat, or going to have really, you could look at coming into it and say, this is a team that could give this team trouble. Notre Dame only has 2 of those on their schedule, like Oregon. Oregon has Penn State and Washington. Notre Dame had Miami, who they've already played and lost to, and then Texas A&M next week. They actually, oddly, played 1 game, have an off week this week, and then they're back at Texas A&M. And then the entire rest of their schedule is barely worth discussing. LSU, however, LSU's already played Clemson and still has to play Florida, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Texas A&M, Alabama, and Oklahoma. That is a gauntlet. I mean, again, all of those teams are not contending for the national championship, but they're certainly going to say something about whether LSU can contend for it. Penn State, and you'll see a theme here emerging amongst these Big Ten teams that have been crowing a lot about their 9-game schedule and how the SEC is just not keeping up. Penn State has 2 games I see here on their schedule that are significant. Oregon, Ohio State. They should be favored in every other game, and if they play the way they should win every other game handily. Ohio State, a little stronger. Ohio State, actually, they've already played Texas out of conference. Again, kudos to them. They didn't run away from competition there. They got Penn State on their schedule. If Penn State has Ohio State, then Ohio State has Penn State. The Michigan game, Michigan's a top 14, 15 team right now. Looks like they're back on the rise after a somewhat mediocre season last year. And by the way, they won last year against Ohio State, and they've won 4 in a row. So I think Michigan is definitely going to say something about what happens to Ohio State until Ohio State proves otherwise. I put Illinois down. I wasn't sure if I should. Illinois is a top 25 team right now. In fact, like number 12. And, raise your hand if you knew that, right? Like how many people really realized Illinois was in the top 25. Brett Bielema, who was coached at Arkansas, has got them playing well. They had a nice season last year, and they're back in the top 25. I don't know if I believe in them as a team that can win. I didn't look at their complete schedule. Like I didn't look at their schedule. They're not on Penn State's schedule, I can tell you that. And they're not on Oregon's schedule. So, but they are on Ohio State's schedule. But I don't know if they're on Michigan's schedule and who else. So, but I feel like Illinois is one of those teams that, if they had Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State on their schedule, they might lose all 3 of those and then win all the other games and have a 10-3 or 9-3 season, right? So I'm not sure I believe Illinois is a real threat to Ohio State, but they're on the schedule. Texas is playing Ohio State already. They still got Florida, Oklahoma, us, go Dogs, and Texas A&M. So those are all going to be. They're not. I mean, that's not a gauntlet, but it's not nothing. And especially given that they're at least on the road this year for like the game against us. So, and Oklahoma, again, we'll know. Oklahoma, we still got a lot to learn about them, whether or not they're make it into the conversation about a more important team than just a spoiler or somebody who matters on other people's schedule. But Oklahoma has had Texas's number on off. I mean, that's a fair fight. You might look at recent years and think Texas is dominating that, but they're not. And then, like I said, we've already talked about our schedule with Tennessee, Alabama, Ole Miss, Florida, Texas, Georgia Tech. So that's quite a schedule. Basically, what this boils down to, let me break it down this way. That's 31. There's 31 games. Of all these games I mentioned, 6 of them are cross games, meaning that of the 9 teams playing each other, that happens for 6 games. So instead of 12 games, there's 6 games because they're playing each other. And 3 of those games, by the way, have already happened. So we had them on opening week, so that was something. So there's still 3 more of these games where the 9 contenders I've listed or think as contenders are going to play each other. So then the rest of these are games that are somewhere else in the schedule. So that means 31 total games here that kind of matter. And when you count out the total number of teams that I've listed in here, there's 22 teams involved in this discussion that are going to have some say in the national championship if the national champion, as I think, comes from one of those 9 teams. So as far as what to be excited about this weekend, not only do we have kind of a less compelling matchup, all of college football has a less compelling matchup this week. There's only one game with 2 top 25 teams playing each other, and that's Michigan traveling to Oklahoma. That's the only really interesting game of the weekend. And no games amongst any of these games I've listed. There are no games from the 9 contenders and the games that I've listed that they have on their schedule that will be impactful in the national championship playoff hunt. None of those games are happening this weekend. So literally nothing to watch for this weekend. But next weekend we have 4 of them. So we had 3 on opening week in the big highlighted top 10 matchups. We got 4 games of these games that I've picked out that are going to matter in the run for the playoff next week. So there's a couple teams here. There's 4 teams that appear just once on this list, have one crack to say something about who makes the playoff. Those are Michigan, Illinois, Washington, and Tennessee. And you know where Tennessee fits next week on our schedule. There is another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of the teams that play 2 or more of these teams. So a bunch of these teams have a chance to have a real impact on the playoff and the national championship. And that includes Georgia Tech, SMU, if I'm correct, and they should be counted in here, Florida State, Florida, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Alabama. And again, Alabama right now is on the outside looking in, right? They can play spoiler, but at the moment we're not seeing them as a contender. So the team that gets to have the most impact, Florida. Florida has 4 games against these 9 teams coming up. So obviously, they play us, but they also play Texas, and they also play Miami on, as we talked about, on September 20th, and they play LSU. So Florida, of all the teams out there right now, in the top 25 or not, and Florida is in the top 25, but of all the teams out there right now that are maybe not title contenders, that are going to have the most to say on who makes the playoff and wins a national championship, Florida right now is that team. Georgia Tech, SMU, Florida State, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Alabama, all have 2 games against those 9 contenders. So, anyway, that's a little perspective, a little breakdown, a little look at. Look, there's 134 teams in the FBS. There's 11 different conferences. We break that down into 4 power conferences, but we break that down further and say, look, in the last 25 years, the last 15 and the last 25 years, only 3 conferences, with the way realignment has come together right now, are represented in teams that have claimed national championships. And going back 25 years, that's only 13 teams. Going back in the last 15 years, it's only 8 teams. And, these are teams with very familiar names, and some of those teams are back in that discussion this year. Now, let's just throw a little idea real quick, or just taking a look real quick. There's 2 teams on that list, or my list for contenders this year, that have never been on the list of those 25 or those 13 and 8 teams from the last 25 and 15 years. Those are Penn State, who of course is a perennial, what's the right word? Historical, I guess. They are a historical national title contender. They are historically one of the 15 or so best teams in the country, and we can figure out exactly where they are, but I'm not trying to slight them and say they're 15th. I'm just saying they are one of the 15 best teams in the history of college football, and they have won national championships, but they have not been a part of a national championship in the last 25 years. And Oregon has never won a national championship, so including them in the list. So those are 2 of my 9 teams that are part of the Big 3 conferences here, the Power 3. I've eliminated it from the Power 4 to the Power 3, and but 2 of those 9 teams. The other teams that are on the other 7 teams from my list of 9 have all won national championships within that 25-year span we've been considering. Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, Clemson, Miami. Oh, you know what? I got to take that back in one way. I just grandfathered Notre Dame in there. Notre Dame has not won a championship in that 25-year span we're talking about either. And of course, they fit in the same category as Penn State, but even higher, meaning that in the historically great teams that have won multiple national championships and are perennial contenders and high-level teams, Notre Dame certainly included in that. But as has been reported on and discussed and kicked around quite a bit, they have not been a part of that party for the national championship in the last 25 seasons. So it's been a while. So there, so 3 of the 6. So let me back that up. 3 of the 9 teams that we're looking at are involved in our teams that have 2 of the 9. Let's say it this way: 2 of the 9 teams are teams that haven't been to the party lately, but have been there before. Penn State and Notre Dame. So they haven't been a part of the title conversation, winning a national championship in the last 25 seasons. But they have been there before, and it's reasonable to think of them as threats. Oregon has never been there, but obviously with the Nike money and Phil Knight's support and just the way they have grown over the last 25 years, they have been a growing threat, and they have been to the national championship game. So they're a team that's not surprising to see in that list. And so that's 3 of the 9 teams. And then the other 6 are teams that have won national championships within the last 15 and 25 years, are part of the conferences and groups of teams and conferences that are always there in the discussion. And the simple truth is this discussion is usually a pretty narrow group of teams. Like I said, out of the 134 teams in FBS, only 13 have even sniffed the national championship in the last 25 years. Less if you go to 15, less if you look at the last 5 or 10 years. So Um, Again, where do we sit in that? Well, that's what we're watching to see each and every week. But, we've already said we've got the talent. We're watching to see how we play. Austin Peay's not going to move that needle much, but, we'll see how it goes. Let's hope that everybody stays healthy. Let's hope some people who were unhealthy get to get in the game and get some practice and get some experience because we have bigger fish to fry. The first game on my list of games that are going to matter and decide whether or not we make the playoff is the Tennessee game the next week. So obviously we want to be well prepared for that. We want to be healthy. We want to have positive momentum. So we hope to see a clean game that's turnover free, where the team mostly dominates, gets good practice, keeps everybody healthy, and moves forward. And we'll keep an eye on those other teams we're talking about. None of them are playing anybody that's going to move the needle either. So there's really nothing this week. It's a great week if you have something else to do. Not just be invested 100% in college football, which is a little sad for week 2. You want to jump in and just keep going after week 1, and we had a great week 1. But this is a week where, of those 31 games that I think are going to impact the national championship amongst those 9 teams that we think are contenders, nobody's playing one of those this week. Next week we get 4 of them. So we'll keep an eye on that. That'll be the barometer that we use to keep judging our team, not just how we play on the field, but how do those other teams look. And, can we match up against those teams? Because, again, that's what it's really going to come down to. At some point, if things go the way we want, we're going to be in a playoff and we're going to face one of those other teams. And what's really going to matter is not how we look stylistically necessarily all throughout the season. It's not going to be whether or not we are as good as we were in 2021 or 22. It's going to be, do we have the tools necessary to beat the team in front of us that day? And so that's what we're going to be watching for. Is we're going to watch how we develop, we're going to watch how they develop, and then we're going to see what happens as we match up together. So hope that gives you a little fan guide, what's going on this week, what to start thinking about keeping an eye on as the season progresses. We'll keep an eye on those games and we'll come back and refer to them, and we'll update our list as we go because, those 9 teams may change. People will move in, people will move out. We'll see what happens. But I'm glad you're here with us. Again, I encourage you, if you can, share some comments, talk about what you'd like to hear us talk about. You can put comments directly on the each page where the podcast is. There's comments listed there. You can put them on podcast, whether you get from Apple or Spotify. You can send an email directly to us from Substack. You can join the chat on Substack or with the notes. Feel free to find any way you can. I'll be happy to find comments and then bring them into the podcast and share them with you. I appreciate you listening, and I also hope remind you to please spread the word. Let other dog fans know that we're out there and we're having this conversation every day, and we hope that they'll be a part of it. So have a great Friday. Looking forward to game day, Saturday in Athens, again tomorrow. And until then, go Dogs.